Now we're going to move into an order that most people are very familiar with, the Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera are commonly known as the bees, the ants, and the wasps. So the word hymen means membrane, while ptera means wings. So these insects are characterized by their membranous wings. They've got, when they're present, these really pretty looking, sometimes clear, sometimes colored, sometimes translucent, whatever, wings when they're present. Now, even on the ants here, some form of the ants have wings, which is why we still group them with Hymenoptera. Now, they have two pairs of wings, but the hind wing is actually pretty reduced. Not as reduced as the Diptera, so it doesn't form a full haltere, but it is smaller than the forewing. So here you can kind of see it. Here's the big forewing. Right down here, you see this little lump of tissue? That right there is the hind wing. It's about half the size or so of the forewing. So what happens with the Hymenoptera is when they fly, the Hymenoptera will hook those hind wings to the forewings with a series of little tiny Velcro-like hooks almost. And so then they use these wings simultaneously to fly. So we don't see that same sort of individual wing flight like we see in, say, the Ornata. Now, the adults are easily recognized. Everybody has seen bees, ants, and wasps, but there are a lot of mimics out there. So the way that you can tell an actual Hymenopteran from anything else is that the adults have a narrow junction between the thorax and the abdomen. I like to call it its little narrow waist. You heard the term wasp waist? Yeah, that's what's going on here. So we got their head and thorax here. Look at that little tiny junction. And then the rest of the abdomen. So it's basically that first segment of the abdomen is super, super constricted. There are other organisms that will mimic these bees, ants, and wasps. And the easiest way to tell the difference is the really large junction between the abdomen and the thorax. So especially in things like termites. So remember how I said that termites, people say, oh, look, we have these white ants. Go back and look at a termite. It's got a really wide junction. That first segment of the abdomen is about the same width as the thorax. Not so in the Hymenoptera. So pretty easy to tell the difference between the two. So anytime you see an insect with a very narrow waist, you probably have a member of the order Hymenoptera. Now, most species of Hymenoptera are narrowly adapted to specific habitats or specific hosts. So we've got our phytophagous or plant-feeding insects, we've got our parasitic Hymenoptera, and some of them are social. You can find them exploiting all manner of niches, from certain plants, a specific type of flower, say, to a specific organism. Some of these will lay their eggs in the eggs of other organisms, in the bodies of other organisms. So they can be very, very special or specialized. So this gives them a big range of behavioral adaptation. You're going to find all kinds of Hymenoptera out there, from the well-known honeybee, so Apis mellifera, all the way down to lesser-known parasitoids of insects and animals. Now, let me talk about that word parasitoid a lot. So it's a lot like the word parasite, right? Something that feeds on a living organism without consuming its entire thing. A parasitoid is a subset of a parasite. A parasitoid, it's only part of the development cycle of this parasite that does the feeding on another living organism. So in parasitoids, it's usually the larvae that are feeding on the young here. And so the larvae are laid as eggs into or onto the body of a host. So that's what we're looking at right here. We've got the body of the host happening here. This is a caterpillar. Yeah. So this is the larvae of the tomato hornworm. And all these little white things on here are eggs. These are eggs of Hymenoptera. This is a parasitoid. So the adult female will lay her eggs on this living host. When the larvae of this parasitoid hatch out, they're going to burrow their way into this caterpillar, and they're going to feed on this living caterpillar from the inside out. I mean, insects don't have refrigerators, they have living hosts to keep their food fresh. Yeah. So they're parasitoids in that case. So they work really well as biological control. So we actually rear a lot of specialized parasitoids as biological control. If you get into this in the future, you are going to find, if you do biocontrol, you're going to be spending a lot of time with Hymenoptera. It's just nuts out there. Now, Hymenoptera are the only other order other than the infraorder Isoptera that have evolved complex social systems. They have that division of labor. They have a caste system. So several species in Hymenoptera will create colonies in which the members have specific jobs. The ones that come to mind are the ants and the bees. So these have a highly evolved social behavior. So in these cases, the colony is formed by a queen. We got our main female. This is a sexually mature adult. What she does is she lays eggs and they hatch into workers. These workers are then responsible for everything from maintaining the hive or the nest to gathering food and to caring for the young. Some eggs hatch into soldiers that protect the hive from invaders. So a lot like that caste system that we saw in the Isoptera. Now, different species of Hymenoptera will have a lesser form of a social system. So sometimes we see things like bumblebees, where you have one queen that lays several eggs, but she doesn't maintain a full colony. Or the wasps that produce nests with a whole bunch of eggs, and they might live with a whole bunch of other wasp queens, but you only see them say during the spring or something of that nature. So there's the full gamut of social systems. Now, different species of Hymenoptera feed on different things. They can feed on plants, they can be predatory, they can be parasitic, and they can be parasitoids. So I talked a little bit about the parasitoids, but they have a wide variety of different types of parasitoid-like behavior. So we talked about this here, laying the eggs. This here is an interesting one that you're going to see out and about, especially if you're here in the South. This is the tarantula hawk. Look at this just gorgeous looking Hymenoptera right here. These tarantula hawks are beautiful. They are bright blue or green. They usually have contrasting colors in their wings. So this is one that we see more in the West, this deep, a really pretty blue with bright orange wings. Here we have a parasitic wasp, the tarantula hawk, that is bright purple with yellow wings. It's just crazy. Tarantula hawks are fascinating because what they do is they feed on tarantulas, or at least their young do. So what's going on here is you're seeing an epic battle for survivorship between a tarantula and the tarantula hawk. So this tarantula hawk, this is the mature female. She is fertilized. She is ready to lay her egg. She goes and she attacks tarantulas. Here's this little brown-footed tarantula. She is going to try to sting this tarantula just behind that cephalothorax. That will keep that tarantula alive but paralyzed. Once she paralyzes the tarantula, she's going to drag that tarantula to a burrow that she has prepared. She's going to bury this tarantula, and then she's going to lay her eggs in the abdomen of this living tarantula. Her larvae are then going to hatch out and feed on the abdominal region of the tarantula, keeping that tarantula alive for most of the time so that the food is fresh. So this is, if you ever see this in the wild, I mean, they fight. It's crazy. And the tarantula hawk, if and when it wins, it's going to pull that tarantula to a burrow and feed on it. Awesome. Now, in their pest form, Hymenoptera, I mean, most Hymenoptera are extremely beneficial, but some are pests. They can cause extensive damage to plants. They can cause damage to landscaping. They can cause damage to homes, the carpenter bees say. But the most well-known pests are probably the ants. And so if you've dealt with ants, you know that they're interesting if you want to keep them as pets, but they also are a pain in the butt if they get into your house. So they create these very large colonies, and they can sting. So remember, the stinging ability means that they are female, and so they can sting anyone who gets near them. If you live in an area where fire ants are common, then you have probably dealt with some pretty nasty stinging ants. These are probably the most annoying Hymenopteran pests because these fire ants, they will sting just the ever-living crap out of you all at once. So that's just awful. Now, the beneficial aspects of Hymenoptera really outweigh the negative aspects, though. They are natural enemies of insects that are pests, or, as most people know, they act as pollinators. So we use many species of Hymenoptera to control other organisms. So we've got our parasitoid here that covers this caterpillar in eggs. Here's another one doing the same thing, different species, much tinier. And this one's actually laying its eggs inside that caterpillar. So the caterpillars will cause extensive damage to crops, so we can release these parasitoids, tiny, tiny parasitoids, into the area and control these plant feeders. So this is a pretty common sight during springtime here. You see these large green caterpillars covered in white eggs, and that's what you're looking at, is Hymenoptera feeding on this plant pest. What's nice is that the adults of these wasps do not sting humans. So even though they have these really long ovipositors, they don't sting. Instead, their ovipositors are specifically used to lay eggs. So the other major benefit of the Hymenoptera is their ability to pollinate plants. I'm sure you are familiar with the honeybee. This is considered by many people to be the most important insect on Earth. Now, this is actually something I was asked during my orals and writtens when I was sitting for my PhD. I had an ecologist on my committee, and he's like, what is the most important insect on Earth? And of course, I'm a forensic entomologist, and so I'm thinking decomposers. And we had an actual argument during my orals and writtens about if honeybees are the most important or if other things were. So his idea was that honeybees are the most important insect on Earth because of their ability to pollinate plants. The honeybee we most commonly see is the European honeybee. Its pollination activities increase the value of U.S. crops by $15 billion per year, which is why they're considered the most important. And they allow us to govern what gets pollinated and how often, which ups the amount of food we're able to produce. But honeybees aren't the only hymenopteran with pollinator capabilities. Any one of the organisms that feed on nectar will act as pollinators. So most of the wasps, the bumblebees, the solitary bees, and even some of the ants are pollinators. So they're very important in that whole pollinating type of activity. Now, some Hymenoptera have some really weird reproductive strategies. So the females can develop from fertilized eggs, while males develop from unfertilized eggs. Therefore, females can control whether or not an egg is fertilized and can regulate the sex ratio of their offspring. So she can decide if a sperm is let out of that spermatheca and actually fertilizes the egg or not. This means that most ant and bee colonies are made up of primarily female individuals. All of the workers, all of the soldiers are female, while the males are only produced when the queen needs to fertilize her eggs. So if she doesn't have a male around, she'll have unfertilized eggs, she'll produce those eggs, she makes males, she can then get something that will fertilize her eggs, and she can make females. Now, I can go on forever about Hymenoptera. I mean, I already have pretty much. They are fascinating insects. They have really complex social systems and behaviors. I just don't have time for that. There are other classes out there that you can take. In fact, there's probably classes at your universities or online that you can take just on honeybees. There are classes you can just take on ants. I highly recommend, if you have the chance to take it, do it. It is fascinating stuff out there. Okay, so instead of going into for a million years, I'm just going to tell you some interesting stories about some of these. I've already told you about some of the parasitoids. I've told you about this tarantula hawk here. And incidentally, the tarantula hawk is considered one of those insects that has the nastiest sting. It's really not that bad. I've been stung by them. They're actually pretty gentle hymenopterans. They are really big, and if you pick them up, you can pet them exactly 4 times before they sting the ever-living shit out of your finger, just for future reference. This is what I know. And their sting doesn't last very long. It's a pretty short-lived sting, but it's pretty painful. I mean, I was like, oh, ow, I'm sorry, I will put you down now. That's one of the reasons they're so brightly colored, is they know they can sting the crap out of you, and they'll be fine. Now, this really pretty bright purple and blue Hymenoptera here, this is called the cuckoo wasp. We have these around where I live. They're actually pretty common in other areas with all different colors, and they have the best colors. They are solitary wasps. They will actually invade the nests of other wasps or of social bees. They'll kill the larvae, and then they will deposit their own eggs. That's why they're named the cuckoo wasp. They're named after the cuckoo bird, who does the exact same thing in birds. The workers in those other Hymenoptera nests then will tend to the eggs of the cuckoo wasp, feed the young, and care for them. Awesome. Now, this here is what we call the honeypot ant. This is a South American species, and this worker ant here will gather nectar and other sugars, and then they use them as living storehouses. So certain workers will fill up their abdomens with these super, super dense sugary liquid, and their abdomens become so big they can no longer leave the nests. They're about the size of grapes at this point. So what they do is they walk up to the roof of their nest, and then they just hang there with their mandibles. They're basically like living refrigerators. This species tends to live on the edges of deserts and other arid habitats. So this method of food storage is beneficial for saving food during the rainy season. And then when the colony is low on food, these ants will regurgitate their stored nectar and feed the rest of the colony throughout this dry season. Now, one of the most notorious characteristics of Hymenoptera are their ability to sting. This is done through the sclerotized ovipositor. So all the bees and wasps and ants that sting you are female because they have an ovipositor. The males do not have ovipositors. Therefore, they do not have the ability to sting. The stinger is used for protection or as a hunting mechanism, and depending on the anatomy, the insect may be able to only sting once or it can sting multiple times. This is a wasp. So this wasp can sting you many, many times because their ovipositors are smooth. The wasp here stings over and over again, each time injecting venom that can cause a severe reaction. So you can see the pulsating of the muscles in the abdomen here. This is injecting venom and forcing the stinger in. So here she is stinging you many times. And here she's just really pumping venom into you. Now, the honeybee. Honeybee is a little bit different. So that was a wasp stinging. These are honeybees. Bees have different anatomy on their stinger. Their stinger is barbed. So once it is forced into your flesh, it is really hard to remove again. So when a bee flies away, it's actually going to rip out the distal portion of its abdomen, leaving the venom glands attached to muscles behind it. So that's what you're seeing here. These muscles continue to contract, and so it forces more and more and more of the venom into your skin even after the bee has flown away. That individual bee dies, but the amount of venom injected into the person or the threat is usually means that the colony is safe. Neat, huh?
Hello there.
Hi.
I leant forward and presented my hands.
Oh, God.
Could I put these gloves on and keep my cool in front of the tribe?
Have mercy.
Obviously not. Jeez, with a couple of deep breaths, though, I felt like I'd be back to normal in no time.
Can I get you a Panadol? A Nurofen Plus?
What do I do? What do I do?
You have to dance to release the pain, Amish.
Okay, can we dance then?
Jeez, I was going to be surprised if this helped.
Seems like a very strange directive from the doctor, isn't it? Just dance.
And evidently, it didn't,
Hang in there, buddy. Hang in there.
because Hames soon commenced what we now know as the 6 stages of sting pain.
Shrieking.
Refusal to dance.
You have to dance.
I don't want to dance. This is the last time I've ever felt like dancing.
Screaming / and or swearing.
Sweating.
Some shaking.
Biting stick requests. Problem was, this went on for an hour, relentlessly.
Cold water?
Yeah,
How's
I
that?
need ice.
Yeah, I'll get you ice. I'll get you ice.
Toxin from the ants generates the worst pain a human is capable of experiencing. There was nothing I could do to help him, so I essentially stood by in shock at the reaction.
I'm just not stopping.
We later found out that not only do these ants sting multiple times a second, but they release a pheromone telling any nearby ants to also sting.
dear.
Haim had been stung 100 times over.
Lie down.
By the 2-hour mark, Hamish had collapsed with exhaustion, but it was clear the pain hadn't receded at all. And the doctor offered up a suggestion.
Let's go to the hospital.
Oh, a bit of a worrywart there, Doc, if you ask me.
Obrigado.
No, seriously, thank you, though.
We made the hour-long trip back to the closest hospital where luckily the emergency doctors were able to treat Haim and I was able to find a seat.
Hola. Good one not to get. Thank you, Chief.
8 hours after the stinging, I was finally able to talk to my friend again.
How you feeling?
I think I prefer being stung by this big white wasp.
Morphine.
Yeah, he's a good wasp. That was unbelievable.
You look a lot like a man now, though, just so you know.
I grew an extra testicle.
The good news is, even though they felt like they'd been busted up by hammers, at midnight I was able to get out of hospital and take my hands to Macca's.
All right, so I just went on forever about Hymenoptera there. Let me know if you have any questions.